ABC General Hospital spoilers for Wednesday, August 13th reveal that when Gio needed reassurance, Rocco was always there, a steady, grounding presence who seemed to instinctively know when to offer a quiet word, a supportive gesture, or simply the comfort of his company. It hadn't always been this way between them. In the early days, the idea of being half-brothers felt more like a label than a reality, an awkward piece of shared history neither quite knew how to navigate. They were linked by blood through one parent, yet their upbringings had been different, their life experiences shaped by separate worlds that didn't naturally overlap. At first, this difference had kept them at arm's length, cautious with each other, uncertain of boundaries or expectations. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, that distance had begun to shrink. The turning point had come during a moment when Joe's confidence had faltered badly. Life had thrown him into a situation he didn't feel prepared for. The kind of pressure that left him doubting not only his abilities but his worth. Rocco, who had once been just a peripheral figure in Joe's life, noticed the shift almost immediately. Without fanfare or intrusion, he positioned himself close enough to offer support without making Gio feel exposed. It was in those small, consistent acts, checking in without being asked, quietly taking care of things Gio was too distracted to handle, that the foundations of their bond began to solidify. Rocco's way was not one of grand speeches or dramatic displays. He understood that reassurance often came from constancy, from proving over time that he would be there, every time, without fail. And for Gio, that reliability was something he had craved without even realizing it. With Rocco, there was no sense of performance or obligation, there was simply presence. This allowed Gio to begin lowering the walls he had spent years building, letting Rocco see the insecurities he had hidden from almost everyone else. As their relationship grew, they began to discover how much they shared beneath the surface differences. Both had learned to navigate complicated family dynamics, to balance loyalty to one parent with an uneasy understanding of the other. Both carried unspoken questions about identity and belonging. Questions that became easier to wrestle with in each other's company. Conversations that had once been guarded slowly became more open, more honest. They could talk about frustrations, about the confusion of having a blended family, about moments of resentment and unexpected gratitude, without fear of judgment. Rocco, in particular, began to see Gio not just as someone he had a responsibility toward because of family ties, but as someone he genuinely wanted to protect and guide. There was a satisfaction in being able to share his own hard-earned lessons, in offering Gio the kind of support he wished he'd had at the same age. Sometimes it was advice about practical matters. Other times it was simply reminding Gio, in subtle ways, that he was stronger and more capable than he believed. For Gio, the change was just as profound. In Rocco, he found someone who could understand his struggles without needing every detail explained, someone whose loyalty was not conditional on shared history alone. When doubts surfaced, when setbacks made him question his path, Rocco's belief in him acted as an anchor. Knowing there was someone in his corner, a brother who had chosen to be there, not out of duty but out of genuine care, helped Gio face challenges with a little more confidence and a lot more resilience. Their connection also began to influence the way they interacted with the rest of the family. Where once they might have navigated family gatherings separately, unsure of how to present themselves as a unit, they now moved through those spaces with an unspoken understanding. A glance across the room could communicate everything from amusement at a shared joke to solidarity in the face of tension. They had become allies, each instinctively watching out for the other. Even their differences, once a source of distance, became a strength. Rocco's steadiness balanced Joe's more impulsive nature, while Joe's willingness to take risks pushed Rocco to step outside his comfort zone. Together, they challenged each other in ways that encouraged growth rather than conflict. Their relationship became a space where both could be their truest selves, flawed but accepted, and that was something neither had found easily elsewhere. Over time, the label of half-brothers began to feel irrelevant. It wasn't the shared DNA that defined them, but the choices they made to show up for each other day after day. They were building something from scratch, piece by piece, transforming a tentative family connection into a genuine brotherhood. And while the path there had not been without its missteps and misunderstandings, each challenge they overcame together only reinforced the strength of the bond they were creating. Now, when Gio faced uncertainty, he no longer felt the isolation he once did. He knew that Rocco would be there, not just to steady him when he stumbled, but to celebrate with him when he succeeded. And for Rocco, being that person for Gio wasn't a burden, it was a privilege. The journey from strangers connected by circumstance to brothers bound by choice had been an unexpected one, but it was, without question, one of the most transformative experiences in both their lives. In learning to trust each other, they had found not only reassurance but a sense of belonging they hadn't known they were missing. Their story was still unfolding, but already it had become clear. The quiet strength of their bond was something rare and enduring, built not on obligation, but on the kind of loyalty that is earned, proven, and unshakable. And whatever challenges lay ahead, they knew they would face them together, as brothers in every way that mattered. Anna was moving with the precision of someone who understood both the urgency and the stakes. For days, she had been circling Brennan, watching for the right moment to press him, waiting for an opening that would allow her to slip past his guarded demeanor. Now, that moment seemed close. The whispers coming from the field were too significant to ignore, the kind of intelligence that could shift the balance in a dangerous game she was already deeply entangled in. If she could persuade Brennan to hand over the critical files he was sitting on, she could not only gain an edge over their enemies but also dismantle a chain of operations that had remained hidden for too long. What made this push even more critical was the stream of reports coming from Jocelyn and Vaughn. Embedded deep within hostile territory, they were sending back information in steady bursts, small fragments at first, but now escalating into revelations that were impossible to dismiss. Each encrypted message carried details that hinted at deeper layers of conspiracy, suggesting the existence of a network whose reach extended far beyond what anyone had initially suspected. The pieces were aligning, and with each one, the situation was becoming more volatile, like a fuse burning toward an inevitable explosion. And then came the confirmation, something that instantly turned tension into a sharp, electric urgency. The intel Jocelyn and Vaughn had risked themselves to transmit contained the detail Anna had been chasing for weeks: Britt was alive. Not a rumor. Not an unconfirmed sighting. Her survival had been verified through cross-checked field sources, complete with location data that could not be dismissed as fabricated. The revelation was both a relief and a warning. Britt's survival meant there was still a chance to bring her back, but it also meant she was in the hands of people who would go to extraordinary lengths to keep her hidden. Whoever was holding her was not operating in isolation. They were part of the very network Anna was trying to expose, a network Brennan's intelligence could help dismantle. But persuading him would not be easy. Brennan was a man who dealt in careful trades, never giving anything without calculating the price. And the kind of information Anna needed could shift alliances in ways that made him vulnerable. Anna understood she would have to play this perfectly, push hard enough to convey urgency, but not so hard that Brennan shut down or buried the intel deeper. She needed him to see that sharing the intelligence wasn't just a move to aid her. It was his chance to secure his own position before the inevitable blowback from the brewing chaos hit everyone involved. The reports from Jocelyn and Vaughn were already beginning to leak into other channels, sparking questions and rumors. The window to act before the situation exploded into open conflict was narrowing by the hour. As Anna prepared for her meeting with Brennan, the atmosphere around her felt charged. Every piece of incoming data like another tremor before a quake. The battlefield was shifting in real time. And the confirmation of Britt's survival had turned a dangerous game into a race against the clock. One wrong move and she could lose not only Brennan's cooperation but also the one lead that might bring Britt home alive. But if she succeeded, if she could pull Brennan into her plan, then the next few days could see the fall of a network that had operated in the shadows for far too long. And the safe return of someone they had all thought lost forever. Drew's latest move came like a sudden fracture through already unstable ground, a calculated public statement delivered with the kind of precision that ensured it would ripple far beyond the room in W. Hitch it was first spoken. It was the sort of declaration designed not merely to grab attention, but to weaponize it, to set events in motion that could not easily be stopped. What made it truly dangerous was not the content alone, but the intent behind it. This was not a slip of the tongue or an impulsive outburst, it was a deliberate act. Crafted to tighten his grip on a growing fixation he now held over both Willow and Liz. In recent weeks, Drew's focus on the two women had intensified in unsettling ways. For Willow, his obsession had been building ever since she resisted the subtle manipulations he had once used to keep her within his sphere. Her refusal to bend had shifted something in him, turning a controlling attachment into a relentless campaign to reassert dominance, not through open aggression, but through carefully orchestrated circumstances that would leave her dependent on his intervention. Liz, on the other hand, had drawn his interest for more strategic reasons. Her proximity to both Willow and the broader web of personal and professional connections around them made her a valuable lever. Someone whose life could be quietly entangled in ways that would pressure others without her even realizing she had been placed at the center of a trap. The adjustments Drew had begun making to his methods in the past days were subtle but effective. He was no longer pushing with brute force, instead, he was rewriting narratives. Reshaping situations so that both Liz and Willow were drawn into increasingly precarious positions without seeing the hand that had placed them there. Information was being shifted. Alliances were being nudged into place. Small pieces of truth were being buried under carefully crafted half-lies. And all of it was unfolding in a way that made his eventual involvement seem like the natural solution to problems he himself had engineered. For Liz, the danger was both professional and personal. By planting seeds of doubt about her decision-making and subtly undermining her credibility in certain circles, Drew was positioning her to appear vulnerable and in need of assistance he would, of course, be ready to provide. It was the kind of manipulation that didn't trigger alarm until it was too late, until the target had already been corralled into a corner with no obvious exit. For Willow, the risk was even more insidious. Drew was quietly working to isolate her from support systems, to cast shadows over her existing relationships so that trust became a fragile, breakable thing. The statement he had made was carefully loaded with implications that would ripple into her personal life, sparking suspicion, eroding confidence, and making her increasingly reliant on him for clarity. By tying Liz's fate to Willow's in subtle ways, he ensured that a threat to one would create instability for the other. A strategy that deepened their entanglement and magnified the pressure on both. What neither woman fully grasped yet was how deliberate this convergence was. Drew was not acting in reaction to circumstances, he was creating them. The shock of his public claim was only the opening gambit in a longer game. One that blurred the line between personal obsession and calculated manipulation. And with each passing day, the quiet adjustments he was making to his tactics were drawing Liz and Willow further into a web where every strand led back to him. If he succeeded in tightening that web completely, both women would find themselves in positions where every move, every decision, would be shadowed by Drew's influence. And in that controlled environment, their safety, both physical and emotional, would depend not on their own choices, but on the will of the man who had deliberately placed them in harm's way. Britt's reprimand came swiftly, delivered with the cold efficiency of someone intent on making an example of her. It wasn't just about a mistake or a lapse in judgment. It was a calculated display of authority meant to reassert control, to remind her and everyone around her that she was not untouchable. The sting of it lingered, not because Britt was unused to pressure, but because it carried an unspoken message. She was under closer scrutiny now. And any further misstep could trigger consequences far worse than a verbal lashing. What made the situation even more volatile was the fact that Jocelyn now knew she existed. That single revelation sent tremors through the carefully guarded world Britt had been forced into. For months, her survival had been a secret leveraged only by those who stood to gain from keeping her hidden. The moment Jocelyn became aware, the walls around that secret began to crack. Jocelyn was not the kind of person who sat quietly on information of that magnitude, especially not when it connected to a larger network of deception and danger. The shadowy figure pulling strings behind Britt's circumstances felt the shift immediately. Secrets were currency in his world, and Britt's existence was a particularly valuable note. Now, with Jocelyn in possession of that knowledge, the balance of control was under threat. If word spread, the leverage he held could evaporate in an instant, and with it, the strategic advantage he had worked to maintain. Fear, tightly contained but very real, began to seep into his calculations. Pascal, however, was not one to react with retreat. His answer to the tightening noose was not to loosen his grip, but to strike harder. To create enough disruption that any attempt to focus on Brit's situation would be overshadowed by more immediate crises. He began planning a series of aggressive moves, actions that would send a message to anyone who thought exposing Brit was an option. These weren't simple intimidation tactics. They were designed to fracture alliances, to turn potential whistleblowers against one another, and to make it clear that interference came with an unacceptably high cost. For Brit, this escalation meant the ground beneath her was shifting yet again. The reprimand had been a warning, but the real danger was unfolding in the wake of it. Jocelyn's awareness had drawn a target not only on her back but on anyone who might try to reach her. And with Pascal preparing to make his next decisive moves, the precarious line Brit had been walking between survival and exposure was about to become even more treacherous. The question now was not just whether Brit could endure the pressure, but whether Jocelyn's knowledge could be contained before Pascal's brand of damage control pushed the situation past the point of no return. In the volatile balance of secrets and power, one wrong move from any player could send the entire game spiraling into chaos, and Brit, whether she wanted to be or not, was right at its center. Willow's conversation with Liz unfolded like the slow unraveling of a tightly bound knot, every sentence tugging at a thread that loosened the restraint she had been holding onto for far too long. What started as small talk, a few careful, measured words, quickly slipped into a more vulnerable rhythm. There was a tension in the air, one Liz recognized immediately. A kind of restless weight that comes when someone is holding a truth too big to carry alone. Willow's hands twisted in her lap, her gaze moving between the floor and the far wall, avoiding Liz's eyes until the silence between them became almost unbearable. When she finally began to speak in earnest, the words came slowly at first, as if Willow had to test each one before releasing it. She described moments that, on their own, might have seemed harmless, encounters, conversations, suggestions, but as she pieced them together, Liz could see the shape of something far more deliberate. And then, without fanfare, Willow said it outright: she had taken Daisy. Her voice didn't crack, but there was a quiet tremor in it. A signal of the strain she'd been under in keeping this to herself. She didn't try to mask the confession with euphemisms or soften it with half-truths. She named her role plainly, as though speaking the words was the only way to begin taking back control from the shame and fear that had been holding her hostage. As Liz sat listening, the gravity of what Willow was saying pulled her deeper into the moment. She didn't interrupt, didn't rush to judgment. Instead, she focused on the details, how Willow explained the lead-up. The manipulation that had been planted in her mind so subtly she hadn't recognized it for what it was until it was far too late. Drew's presence was there in every stage of the story. Not as an overt commander but as a steady, invisible force shaping her decisions, framing the circumstances so that taking Daisy felt like the only option. It was a kind of psychological pressure that didn't just trap someone in a moment, it rewrote their understanding of right and wrong. Willow spoke of the night it happened, of the crushing mix of fear and certainty she felt, of the way every exit seemed blocked until she walked the one path she thought could keep Daisy safe. Only now, in hindsight, could she see how every step had been guided, every perceived choice narrowed until there was only one left, his choice, not hers. By the time Willow fell silent, the confession hung between them like a raw, open wound. Liz felt the weight of it pressing down, not only because of the act itself, but because of what it meant for everything connected to it. This wasn't just about Daisy's disappearance, it was a thread that, once pulled, could unravel a much larger tapestry of secrets and control. Liz could see the shape of it forming. Drew's manipulations, the strategic placement of people and events, the way every move seemed designed to protect himself while placing others in jeopardy. The danger, Liz realized, wasn't behind them, it was growing. The fact that Willow had been willing to admit this meant that the walls were already closing in. If Drew suspected she was cracking under the weight of what she knew, he wouldn't hesitate to act, and his next moves would be designed to keep both Willow and Liz contained, silenced, or worse. Liz felt a deep shift in that moment. She knew she couldn't let Willow carry this alone, but helping her would mean stepping directly into the path of whatever Drew had planned. The two of them were now bound by this truth, tied together not just by friendship but by the shared knowledge of something that could destroy lives if it ever became public in the wrong way. And yet, even with the risk, there was no going back. The words had been spoken, the truth laid bare. Every step from here would take them deeper into the heart of a dangerous game neither of them had chosen. But both now had to play. The difference was that now, Liz understood the stakes. And she understood, perhaps better than Willow, just how far Drew might go to protect the secrets they were beginning to uncover.